The snow fell sideways, not soft, not pretty, just cruel, like ash after a fire. It clung to the wind like it had nowhere else to go, and it stung as it hit skin. Clara stood at the edge of the field where the fence had collapsed, a rusted shovel clutched in her gloveless hands. The leather had torn days ago. She hadn't fixed it. She hadn't fixed much. The ground was too frozen to dig, but she kept digging anyway. The wood had snapped in 3 places, and her oldest boy had tied it with rope, but that rope was now buried in ice, useless as a broken promise. Her fingers were red and raw. She couldn't feel them anymore. Behind her, the small house waited like a sick child. Smoke curled thin from the chimney, but it wasn't warm inside, just less cold. The children hadn't spoken much that morning. Ruth, the youngest, had cried in her sleep again. The boy Jesse pretended not to hear. The animals were nearly gone. 1 ewe left, half-starved and coughing through the nights. No chickens. The last rooster had died last week, and she hadn't even buried it, just left it behind the shed for the foxes. Maybe that was cruel. Maybe it was just easier that way. She stabbed the shovel into the frozen earth, but it bounced, hitting a rock beneath. Her wrist jerked. She winced and held it, breath rising sharp in her chest. Her skirts were soaked from the knees down, stiff with ice, and the scarf at her throat no longer held warmth. She was 34, but looked older now, something in the eyes maybe. Or the silence she carried. A gust came, pushing her forward, stealing the warmth from her neck. She stared at the broken fence again. It wasn't the fence. It was everything. Everything was breaking. She whispered it aloud this time, just to feel the shape of it. "We have no money left." The words fell flat in the wind. No one heard. The man on the ridge did. He'd been there a while, watching from the line of bare pines that bordered the property. Tall in the saddle, his coat dark with snow at the shoulders. He hadn't meant to come this close. Just passing through. Or that was the lie he'd told himself. She didn't see him yet. Not until he moved the horse forward and the animal snorted, breath clouding in the cold. Then she turned, slowly, warily, and her hand drifted to her waist like she might be armed. He raised a hand. No threat. Just a man in a storm. "You don't need money," he said, voice low even. "You need me." She didn't speak. Just stared at him like he'd slapped her. Then, "I don't take in strangers." "I'm not one." He dismounted, boots crunching on the crust of snow. The horse followed, obedient, steam rising from its flank. He looked older than she remembered, his beard flecked with gray, lines deeper at the eyes. But it was him, Clay McKenna, 5 years gone. She took a step back. "I thought you were dead." "No, just lost." She looked away. "You heard me say that?" "I did." He was close enough now to see the way her hand trembled on the shovel. She dropped it, slowly. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she swayed. Clay reached out, but didn't touch her. "I didn't come for sympathy." "What then?" He didn't answer. Just looked toward the broken fence, then past it, to the barely standing barn, to the tired smoke of the chimney, to the silent land around them. She followed his gaze. Everything empty, everything cold. Behind her, inside the house, Ruth began to cry. She turned fast and started toward the door, half running. Clay followed. "Subscribe to the channel and stand with those who endure when the world would see them fall." Inside, the air smelled of boiled potatoes and old wood. Jesse sat by the stove, arms wrapped around his knees. The other girl, Maggie, knelt beside Ruth, trying to hush her gently. Clay paused in the doorway, took off his hat, waited. The children looked up. Jesse stood, tall for 12, and stared at the stranger like a man grown. Clara moved past him, scooping Ruth into her arms. She didn't speak. Her jaw clenched hard. Finally, she looked over her shoulder. "You left without a word." "I know. And now you're just here?" "Yes." Silence. "I don't need a ghost." "I'm not a ghost. I'm real. And I got 2 hands that can work." She stood still, then slowly set Ruth down. "If you're lying to me again." "I'm not. If you ever were mine, istilam." The snow hissed against the windows. Outside, the wind kept on blowing. Inside, something shifted. Not warm, not yet, but maybe something close. He didn't stay in the house. Not at first. After she gave him a hard look and a rough blanket, Clay bedded down in the barn, though there was hardly much left of it. The roof sagged like an old man's shoulders, and the loft smelled of mold and rot. Still, he rolled out his bedroll on a patch of hay and took it without complaint. Wind snuck in through every crack, but he didn't light a fire. Didn't want to draw attention. Mornings came early, before sunup, before even the rooster, when there had still been one. Clay was out with the axe, splitting what little wood they had left, stacking it clean beside the porch. He watered the ewe, patched the coop though no chickens waited inside, and then set to fixing the fence. Jessie watched from a distance, arms folded tight. Maggie peeked from behind curtains. Ruth didn't quite understand yet. Clara said nothing at all, but she noticed. She noticed how he worked without being asked, without asking anything in return. She noticed how he spoke gently to the horse as he brushed it, how he kept his back to her when he bathed with snowmelt, how he whittled scraps of wood by lantern light in the barn when sleep wouldn't come. He carved small things: a bird, a rabbit, a wagon with crooked wheels, and left them on the porch rail, saying nothing. One morning she found Ruth turning one in her small fingers, silent with wonder. Clara picked it up, held it a moment, then set it back. When she turned, Clay was by the shed, sawing through a rotted beam. He didn't look over. He didn't need to. That afternoon, Clara stood in the open doorway with her sleeves rolled to the elbows. She had a pale scar on her wrist, nearly hidden by the soot that never seemed to wash off. The wind pulled at her hair, no longer pinned. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "There's a place north of the ridge. Spring water still runs. I haven't been able to clear it since last summer." Clay nodded. "I'll go." She turned back inside, but that was the first time she'd asked. They began to speak then. Not much, just enough. He told her how he'd headed south after her husband died, too ashamed to come back. Said he'd lost himself in Texas cattle trails and winter wages, that he didn't belong anywhere for a long while, that he hadn't written because he hadn't believed he deserved to. She didn't forgive him. Not right away. But she let him speak. And when she spoke, it wasn't about grief. Not directly. She talked about the barn repairs, about the mill 3 miles downriver, about Jessie needing boots and Maggie's fever last fall. She spoke of practical things, but her voice cracked once when she said the word boots, and Clay didn't miss it. The thaw came slow. And not just in the snow. One morning, after Clay had brought in a fresh rabbit and gutted it by the creek, Clara invited him to sit at the table. It wasn't much. Wooden bowls, a pot of beans, a silence that stretched. But she didn't flinch when his knee bumped hers under the table. She didn't move away when he handed Ruth a piece of carved pine shaped like a horse. Later that week, she showed him the records her husband had kept. Crops, debts, the loan from the bank she could no longer pay. Her voice was flat as she spoke of it, but her hands trembled as she turned the pages. "I thought I could hold it all together," she said. "For the children, for him, for me. But it's been near 3 winters and I can't, not anymore." He watched her. The firelight traced the bones of her face, made her eyes darker, softer. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away. By the time the snow melted fully, he'd moved into the house. Not with a kiss, not with a promise, just a quiet shift. One evening, his bedroll was by the hearth instead of the barn. The next night, his coat hung on the same peg as hers. Jessie didn't protest. Maggie asked questions in whispers. Ruth curled up against Clay's side during storms, and he didn't push her away. One night, Clara found him fixing the broken leg of her rocking chair, the one her mother had sat in when she nursed all 3 children. "You don't have to fix everything," she said. "I know, but you try anyway." He looked up at her, the lamplight gold in his beard. "I ain't got much else to give," he said. "But what I've got, it's yours." She looked down at her hands, calloused, cracked, stronger than they'd ever been. Then she looked at him. "I never needed money," she said. "I just needed not to be alone." The chair creaked once, then held steady beneath her weight. The land softened with spring. It didn't come all at once, nothing did out here, but in small, deliberate gestures. The ice pulled back from the creek. Shoots of green nosed through the frost-bitten soil like they weren't sure they were welcome. The trees above the ridge gave off a faint scent of sap and new growth. Clay was in the field early, digging long furrows with the plow he'd repaired by hand. The mule was stubborn, but he coaxed it through each pass with low, steady words. Clara watched from the porch, arms crossed, the hem of her dress brushing the tips of her boots. She said nothing, but he knew she was watching. Had been for weeks. Inside, Maggie was washing the baby's clothes, what was left of them, and Jessie was learning to mend shoes. Ruth sat with a book on her lap, upside down, pretending to read. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was something near it. Clara had started humming again. At night, the lamp stayed lit longer. Clay began teaching Jessie how to sharpen the blades, how to oil the rifle without wasting grease. Clara helped him patch the barn roof. They passed the hammer between them without speaking, and when he caught her by the wrist to steady her on the ladder, she didn't pull away. One night after supper, Jessie asked, "Are you staying then?" Clay didn't answer right away. He looked to Clara. Her eyes didn't leave the fire. "Yes," she said, "he's staying." No one asked again. But nothing stays easy on land like this. Not for long. It started with a man on a pale horse, dust cloud behind him, a paper in hand, rode up fast like he owned the place. Wore a gray coat and a silver watch, both too clean for honest work. Clara met him at the edge of the field, arms folded, chin high. He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Yates?" She nodded. He held out the paper. "Banks decided to act early on the lien. They're calling the debt. You've got 30 days. Clay stepped up behind her. The man glanced at him, took his measure, then looked back to Clara. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Truly." She didn't take the paper. "Leave it on the porch." He did, then turned and rode away, boots clean, conscience cleaner. That night, the silence in the house was thick enough to bite. The children stayed quiet, eyes on their plates. Clay and Clara sat at the table long after supper, the lamp between them. She finally spoke. "I can't pay it. I know. They'll take the land. I won't let them." She met his eyes across the table. "I've got nothing left to sell. Not even pride." He reached across, touched her hand. "Then we don't sell. We fight." "You can't fight a bank, Clay." He gave a slow nod. "Not with fists." The next morning, they rode into town. The general store owner owed Clay a favor from back when Clay had pulled his boy out of a flooding creek 5 years prior. The man offered supplies, seed, nails, flour, and a list of who might help. The pastor gave them time in the meeting hall. The schoolteacher volunteered to draft letters. They spent days gathering. Clara stood up and spoke in front of 10 men and 8 women, her voice strong, even as her hands shook behind her back. She told them what the land meant, what it had cost her, what it still owed her, and how the bank was cutting off the breath of too many families like hers. Clay spoke next. He was brief, plain-spoken. But there was something in his voice that caught in the ribs of every man there. By week's end, there were signatures. Enough to pressure the bank, enough to raise a small fund, enough to make someone in a clean office take notice. Still, it might not be enough. The final notice came on a Tuesday. Rain falling slow and mean outside. The bank would not bend. That night, Clara sat on the porch alone, her shawl clutched tight at her throat. Clay joined her, quiet at first. Then, "I'll leave if you want. Maybe they'll go easier on you without me here." She turned, slowly. "You think that's what I want? I think I've brought you more trouble than help. You think I'd rather face this alone again?" She stood, stepped toward him. The wind caught her hair and blew it wild across her face. "I watched you come back from nothing, Clay. I watched you build with your hands, teach my children, eat the same thin soup I did without ever asking for more. Don't stand there and ask me if I want you gone." He took a breath. "What do you want then?" She didn't answer with words. She stepped closer, close enough to feel his breath, and placed her palm on his chest. Beneath it, his heart beat like hooves across dry earth. "I want a life with you," she said. "Even if it's hard, even if it breaks." He leaned in then, and for the first time since he'd come back, he kissed her. Not gently, not wildly, just true. The rain kept falling, but they didn't feel cold. The wind turned warm by the middle of May. It swept through the fields like a long exhale, breathing color back into the grass, pushing the scent of wet soil and lilac through the windows of the house. Clara moved differently now, still tired. Always tired, but there was a steadiness to her step, a kind of quiet rootedness that hadn't been there before. She worked the land beside Clay, planted potatoes, beans, rows of corn. She taught Maggie how to stitch seams that would hold. Jesse started building a hen house, though they still had no hens. He said they'd come. Somehow. He believed it, and that was enough for now. One morning, Clara and Clay stood at the edge of the field where the soil ran darkest. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. Fog clung to the ground like a low tide. Her hair was loose, tucked behind her ears, and her hands were thick with dirt. Clay was rolling up his sleeves. "You see this land?" she asked, her voice quiet, more thought than speech. He nodded. "My mother used to say God don't answer loud," she said. "Said he answers in roots, in the way wheat bends without breaking, in how the earth still gives, even after everything's been taken." Clay didn't say anything, but I stopped listening, she went on. "After Sam died, after that last winter, I thought maybe he'd stop speaking altogether." He looked at her, not with pity, never with pity, but with something softer. "And now?" he asked. She watched a bird settle on the post fence. Small, brown, plain, but alive. Still singing. "Now I think maybe he was just waiting on me to speak first." That afternoon, the first real letter came back from the bank. The committee had met. The petition, the signatures, the community's involvement, it had swayed one of the boardmen. Not enough to forgive the debt outright, but enough to buy more time. 3 months, maybe 4. A chance. Clara read the letter aloud at the dinner table. Maggie grinned. Jesse let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ruth clapped, not fully understanding, only catching the relief in her mother's voice. Clay just nodded. "We'll make good on it," he said. They kept working, and the hens did come, as if by some small miracle. A neighbor moving east dropped off a crate of them, scrawny, half-molting, but alive. Jesse rebuilt the coop, stronger this time. Maggie named each one. Clara began keeping a journal again. In the early morning hours before Ruth woke, she wrote with the stump of a pencil by the kitchen window. Small things. Weather. Planting dates. Clay's habit of leaving coffee on before she rose. The way Ruth curled her toes when she slept. There were still hard days. Clara never pretended otherwise. Clay would sometimes wake from dreams he didn't speak of. She found him once, sitting on the porch with his head in his hands, before dawn had broken. She sat beside him. "Where'd you go just now?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nowhere I want to be." She didn't press, just rested her hand on his knee. "We're here now," she said. "That's all that counts." And slowly, the ache that had lived in both of them for too long began to dull. Not disappear, but settle. Like old roots beneath the soil, deep, unseen, but holding firm. The neighbors started visiting again, not out of pity this time, but respect. Men brought spare tools. Women brought canned fruit. Someone even sent a pair of lambs come June. Word spread of how Clara Yates and Clay McKenna had turned back the bank's hand. How they'd saved the homestead without bullets, without begging, just with stubbornness and work, and something that felt an awful lot like faith. On the 4th of July, Jesse lit a sparkler in the field and ran circles around Ruth, while Maggie laughed so hard she fell over in the dirt. Clay and Clara stood on the porch, shoulder to shoulder, watching. The stars were beginning to show. "You remember what you said that day?" she asked. "When you came back?" He turned to her, one brow raised. "You said I didn't need money," she went on. "You said I needed you." He looked out toward the horizon where the sun had just dipped, setting the clouds on fire. "I was right." She reached for his hand, wove her fingers into his. "You were." He squeezed back, and then, for the first time in a long time, the night felt full. Summer burned slow and long across the prairie. The wheat grew tall and gold, shimmering under heat like an ocean that never moved. The dirt roads baked dry. The creek shrank to a whisper, but the crops held on. Everything held on. Clay built a windbreak near the south fence to shield the young trees. Clara stitched curtains from old dresses, brightening the room. There was music again, Maggie plucking clumsy notes on Jesse's fiddle, Ruth singing nonsense songs to her hens. Clay hummed sometimes when he worked, low and rough, but it stayed with her. One afternoon, she found him out by the back pasture, shirt off, hauling stones from a collapsed wall. Sweat darkened his back, muscles straining with every lift. He didn't see her at first, just worked like it was the only thing holding him to the earth. She brought him water, held the tin cup while he drank. wiping the edge clean with her apron before taking a sip herself. He looked at her over the rim. "You watching me?" She smiled. "I watch everything." He stepped close, cupped the side of her face with a calloused hand. "You still afraid I'll leave?" "I think I'll always be a little afraid." He nodded. "Then I'll keep showing you I won't." Later that night, when the children were asleep and the sky hung heavy with stars, she pulled him to her without words. They lay together under a wool blanket on the porch. The sounds of the fields all around them whined in the grass, owls calling, crickets humming. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, down the scar on his shoulder. "What would you have done if I hadn't let you stay?" she whispered. "Gone to the next ridge, built a fence for someone else, waited for winter to pass. And after that, I'd have come back." She kissed him then, soft and steady, the kind of kiss that didn't need to end in anything but breath. But peace never stayed long. Near the end of August, a man rode up. Dusty, lean, hat low. His horse bore the mark of the McGree estate, a name neither Clay nor Clara had wanted to hear again. Clay met him halfway down the road, jaw tight. The man handed over a folded letter and waited. Clay read it. Clara watched from the porch, fists clenched. When the man rode away, Clay walked slow up the path. "It's a legal claim," he said. "Your husband owed them. They say you forged the petition, that it's fraud. They're lying. I know. But lies can bleed like truth when there's money behind them." Clara's voice didn't waver. "So what do? We fight again." And they did. Clay rode to the town clerk, brought copies of land deeds, spoke to every man who had signed her petition. Clara rode north to the parson's house, gathered character statements, tracked every dollar she hadn't spent, every crop she'd pulled from dead soil. Neighbors wrote letters. Jesse rode them into town on the mule, grinning like a soldier with orders. Even Ruth pressed her handprint onto a paper and said, "For Mama." The hearing was held in the schoolhouse. Clara stood straight before the banker's lawyer, her dress plain, her boots dusty. When asked how she expected to survive the winter, she looked to Clay, then back to the judge. "Together," she said. The room was silent. Clay stood and added, "There ain't a law in this state strong enough to crush a woman who works like she does. And if you try, you'd better be ready to fight all of us." The judge ruled in their favor. No fraud, no seizure. Outside, the wind picked up, the kind that came before the harvest. That night, Clara wept for the first time in front of him. Not from grief, not from fear, just release. He held her, said nothing, let the weight pass through both of them like water through stone. And when the moon rose, they stood together at the edge of the porch. "I want to marry you," he said. She looked at him, eyes wide, still wet. "I never thought I'd hear that again." "I'm not him." "I know," she said, "but I'm not who I was either." He reached into his pocket. Not a ring, just a ribbon. Frayed, blue-gray, once used to tie her hair. He tied it gently around her wrist. "Then let's be new together." She smiled, and under a sky that held every star they thought they'd lost, she whispered, "Yes." The wedding was quiet, just the way Clara wanted. No white dress, no altar. Just a circle of friends and neighbors standing in the tall grass behind the house, the wheat bending around them like a kind of prayer. Ruth wore a wreath of wildflowers. Maggie held a basket of apples. Jesse stood behind Clay, taller now, face already edged with the man he was becoming. The preacher said his words, simple, honest ones, then asked them both to speak. Clay cleared his throat. "I've lived a long time carrying ghosts. Carried shame, too. Wore it like a second skin. But the day I saw you again, standing by that broken fence, I knew it wasn't too late to be more than what I'd been. You gave me that chance. I promised to be your home. I promised to stay." Clara's voice trembled, but she didn't look away from him. "I've buried a husband. Buried dreams, too. I've known hunger in my belly and hollowness in my heart. But you came back, not asking for forgiveness, just offering your hands, your heart. I take them both. And I give you mine." They didn't kiss right away, just stood, forehead to forehead, the wind catching her veil, a scrap of lace from her mother's old shawl, and lifting it like wings. Then Maggie cheered. Jesse clapped once. Ruth hugged both their legs, nearly toppling them. Afterward, there was stew and cornbread and cider. Neighbors played fiddles. 2 old women danced with each other barefoot in the dirt. Someone brought a pie. Someone else sang an old hymn that made Clara close her eyes. That night, Clay and Clara sat alone on the porch. The moon was full and high. The land breathed quietly around them. "Feels different," he said. "It should. You all right?" She leaned into his shoulder. "I am now." He kissed the side of her head. The days after blurred into the rhythm of new life. There was harvesting, mending, school lessons. They bought another ewe from the Thompsons downriver. Jesse shot his first deer, and Clay showed him how to clean it without waste. Maggie learned to cook stew without burning it. Ruth learned to read the word home. Clara began keeping track of the accounts again. Not because she was afraid, but because she was planning. They spoke of building another room onto the house before winter. Clay wanted to bring in a new stove. She wanted shelves for books. Together they planted a pear tree just beyond the fence. Clara marked the spot with a stone she carved herself. Then, one morning in late September, she walked out to the fields before the sun had fully risen. Clay was already there, wiping sweat from his brow, the plow halfway through a new row. She waited until he saw her. "I'm late," she said. He blinked. "To what?" "Tvåmunds." His jaw went slack. "You mean?" She nodded, smiling now, a slow, wide smile he hadn't seen before. "I think we'll be 5 come spring." Clay stepped forward, hands shaking a little. He touched her belly, reverently, like it was made of glass and light. His eyes brimmed. "I know, but it's real?" She nodded again. "It's real." He pulled her to him, laughing low in his throat, burying his face in her neck. She held him, arms wrapped tight, heart thudding like hooves again. Later that week, she dug out a cedar box from the trunk at the end of her bed. Inside was her mother's baby quilt, hand-stitched decades ago. She'd kept it through every move, every storm, every moment, when she hadn't believed it would ever be used again. She unfolded it, laid it across the back of the rocker Clay had fixed. The house felt fuller, not just with voices or the creak of boards under tired feet, but with something deeper, a belonging, a knowing. One evening, as the first frost silvered the grass and the fire crackled low, Clara sat in that chair, her hand resting gently on her belly. Clay sat beside her, boots off, Ruth asleep across his lap. The other children whispered stories nearby, the pages of a book rustling soft. Outside, the wind stirred the wheat one last time before winter took hold. Inside, they were warm. They had nothing more to prove. They had everything they needed. If you felt the weight of silence and still searched for hope, subscribe and share this path.